If you always say, anything's fine, you may need to hear this. You probably think you are being easy to love. But without realizing it, you may be making yourself almost impossible to know. They ask what you want for dinner, and you already know the answer. You want Thai food. There is a place you have been thinking about all week. But instead of saying that, you look at them and say, anything's fine. You pick. It seems like a small moment. You are not starting an argument, making demands, or forcing someone to change their plans. You are simply being flexible. Then, a few months later, they stop asking. They choose the restaurant, pick the movie, and make the plan for Saturday. Instead of asking what you would enjoy, they simply tell you when to be ready. And somehow, that hurts more than choosing the wrong restaurant ever did. You begin to think that they never consider what you want, that they do not really know you, or that you are being carried through a life designed entirely by someone else. That feeling may be real. But sometimes, the relationship did ask. And over time, you taught it that you had no answer. There is nothing wrong with being easygoing. Sometimes you genuinely do not care whether dinner is Thai or Italian. And not every small decision needs to become a negotiation. But there is another version of, anything's fine. It is the version where you do have a preference, but erase it before anyone else has the chance to respond. Because having a preference creates a small but real risk. The moment you say, I want Thai, the other person might want something different. They might sigh, look disappointed, or agree reluctantly, and then have a bad time, leaving you to feel responsible for the entire evening. They might also simply say no. And then you have to sit with the strangely exposed feeling of wanting something that was not chosen. So you remove yourself from the decision before disagreement has a chance to find you. In those moments, anything's fine does not mean that you have no preference. It may mean that you do not want your preference to become a problem, that you do not want to seem difficult, or that you are afraid to discover whether there is actually room for what you want. The sentence protects you beautifully in the moment. There is no visible need, no immediate conflict, and no chance of being blamed if the choice goes badly. But while it protects you, it also sends the relationship incomplete information. Your partner hears flexibility, but they cannot hear the preference you swallowed. They cannot respond to a part of you that never entered the conversation. When this happens once, it may mean nothing. When it happens at every meal, every weekend, and every small shared decision, it slowly begins to define the roles inside the relationship. One person becomes the chooser, while the other becomes the person who agrees. The chooser may begin to feel as though every decision has been placed on their shoulders. They have to decide where you eat, what you watch, and how you spend the weekend, while somehow also being expected to choose something that will make both of you happy. Meanwhile, the person who keeps agreeing may begin to feel as though none of those decisions truly include them. One person feels burdened by always having to choose. The other feels erased because they are never being considered. Both people can become lonely inside the same arrangement. Then comes the quiet reversal. The other person stops asking, not necessarily because they have stopped caring, but because a question that repeatedly receives no usable answer can eventually begin to feel ceremonial. What do you want to do? I don't mind. Where do you want to eat? Anywhere. Which one do you like? Whatever you prefer. After enough conversations like this, they may genuinely believe they are helping by deciding quickly. They may think they are giving you exactly what you have been asking for all along: freedom from having to choose. But what they experience as efficiency, you experience as the disappearance of an invitation. You notice that they no longer turn toward you before making a plan. You notice that your opinion is no longer part of the decision. And you begin to feel as though your presence matters less than it once did. Because you never said, I want to be asked, even when I am afraid to answer. The hurt arrives without an explanation the other person can understand. Resentment begins to grow around preferences that were never spoken. They should know that I hate crowded places. They should remember that I wanted to see that film. They should notice that I am always the one going along with their plans. But from the other person's side, your agreement may have looked like genuine agreement. Your silence may have looked like ease. And your accommodation may have looked like contentment. This does not mean that your hurt is your fault. And it does not mean that every partner is attentive simply because they asked once. Sometimes people hide their preferences because the relationship has taught them that expressing one is unsafe. If your wishes are regularly mocked, dismissed, punished, or treated as an inconvenience, your hesitation contains important information about the relationship itself. The answer is not to become more vulnerable with someone who repeatedly uses your honesty against you. But when the other person has been making real room for an answer, and you keep stepping out of that room, the distance may not begin when they stop asking. It may begin 1 second earlier, when you decide that being easy to be with is safer than being possible to know. That is the bargain. You avoid the risk of taking up space, but the relationship receives a version of you with very little shape, a reliable companion who rarely creates friction, but whose pleasure is difficult to create deliberately because nobody has been allowed to learn what it depends on. You may be loved and genuinely cared for, yet still feel unseen, not because nobody ever looked, but because the self you wanted them to see kept leaving before the conversation began. The shift is not that you need to become demanding or insist that your partner should always do what you want. It is much simpler than that. A preference is not a command. It is information. Saying, "I would like Thai tonight," does not mean that the other person is not allowed to want Italian. Saying, "I would rather stay home on Saturday," does not mean that their plan is bad. And saying, "I want the window seat," does not mean that your comfort matters more than theirs. A preference simply places something real on the table so that two people can work with it. They can agree, disagree, take turns, or look for a third option. Sometimes they may even discover a genuine incompatibility that needs to be faced. But none of those possibilities can exist while one person keeps removing their half of the conversation. So the next time someone asks what you want, notice how quickly "anything's fine" appears. Do not force yourself to invent a preference, and do not turn every small decision into a test of whether you are being heard. Simply pause long enough to ask yourself whether the sentence is actually true. If you genuinely do not care, say so. But when a real preference is hiding underneath, try giving it one honest sentence. "I'd prefer Thai tonight. What are you in the mood for?" "I want a quiet weekend. Is there something you were hoping we would do?" "I'd like to choose the movie this time." You do not need to give a speech, apologize for wanting something, or immediately retreat by adding, "but it doesn't really matter." Just offer one clear piece of information while leaving enough room for the other person to remain real too. This may feel strangely exposed, because now they can respond to what you actually want. They can meet it, negotiate with it, misunderstand it, or say no to it. And their response, especially over time, will tell you something your silence could never reveal. Whether the relationship can make room for difference without turning it into a threat. Being known is not something another person can accomplish alone. They can be curious, ask carefully, pay attention, and remember what matters to you. But eventually, you have to remain present long enough to be found. You do not need to become difficult to stop disappearing. You only need to let one true preference stay in the room.